On this episode of Skeptico, Alex talks with the neuroscientist Dr. Mario Beauregard about his new book, Brain Wars.
There eventually will be another big revolution in science, and this will be about mind and consciousness. And the same kind of revolution that they've had about 100 years ago in physics, from classical physics to quantum physics. At the same time, in parallel, of course, like you said at the beginning of the interview, if you talk to lay people, to most people, they do not believe that they are strictly biological robots, that they don't have any influence over their brain activity or what's happening in the body and so on and so forth. And so it won't be difficult if there's the start of really a transition in science, within science. It will go quickly because the rest of the world, is very sympathetic regarding a non-materialist view of consciousness and of human life.
Stay with us for Skeptico.
Welcome to Skeptico, where we explore controversial science with leading researchers, thinkers, and their critics. I'm your host, Alex Sekeres, and on this episode of Skeptico, we're going to talk to Dr. Mario Beauregard about his fascinating work in his very compelling book, Brain Wars. So on this show, we've talked quite a bit about the end of materialism and the evidence for that, which has been mounting and is pretty overwhelming at this point. Well, here's a guy who's really pulled all that together in a way that really creates quite an overwhelmingly convincing case for anyone who dares to look. Here's my interview with Dr. Mario Beauregard. Today we welcome Dr. Mario Beauregard to Skeptico. Dr. Beauregard is an associate research professor at the Neuroscience Research Center at the University of Montreal. He has a PhD in neuroscience, also from the University of Montreal, and he also has 2 postdoctorate fellowships in experimental neuropsychology. He's the author of over 100 publications in neuroscience, psychology, and psychiatry. And he's here today to talk about his latest book, Brain Wars: The Scientific Battle Over the Existence of the Mind and Proof That Will Change the Way We Live Our Lives. Mario, thank you very much for joining me today on Skeptico, and welcome.
Thanks to you.
So your book, Brain Wars, and this battle over whether we are really just biological robots, as our friend Stephen Hawking likes to say, is a frequent topic on this show. So I think you're going to find an audience who is well aware of a lot of the issues. But you really do a great job of kind of presenting it in your book and pulling it all together. Can you tell us a little bit briefly about what your book is about?
Well, the starting point is the what we call the modern scientific worldview. So it's the worldview that is based on classical physics, and this view is based on a number of fundamental assumptions like materialism, determinism, reductionism also. So applied to mind and brain, it means that, for instance, everything in the universe is only matter and energy. Therefore, the brain is a physical object too, and the mind can be reduced strictly to electrical and chemical processes in the brain. It means also that everything is determined from a material or physical point of view. So we don't have any freedom. We're like biological robots, totally determined by our neurons and our genes and so on and so forth. And so we're reduced to material objects, and we are determined by material processes. So that's what we call the modern scientific worldview. But
right, but Dr. Beauregard, is that really where science is at? Because I think that one of the problems that kind of the people on the street, if you will, folks that I talk to who are not engaged in this debate, they kind of take a view of it kind of the way that a lot of folks in America and in North America treat Catholicism or even Christianity. It's like, yeah, kind of, but I don't really hold to all that. Do most people really believe any of that? And to what extent is that really the mainstream view within science?
Well, it's the mainstream view, I would say, still in the biomedical field. It is also in philosophy. However, in physics, everything changed about 100 years ago. So they've had their own revolution from classical physics to quantum physics, and they dematerialized the world. So the quantum physicists, the founding fathers of quantum physics, realized that the world, the universe is not constituted of tiny physical particles, like billiard balls, for instance, but they realize that there's a very important mental component in the universe, and this relates to the so-called measurement problem or the observer effect. So the physicist and his instrument, they are influencing to a certain extent the outcome of the experiment at a microphysical level. Whether they are measuring either particles or waves. And so now it's recognized in quantum physics that you cannot explain the universe or understand the universe without making reference to what we call mind and consciousness. But in the biomedical field, including neuroscience, it's a different ballgame. Most scientists in my field of research, for instance, are not aware of these. They don't know very well quantum physics, and they are not aware that there's been a revolution 100 years ago regarding these fundamental issues. And it's the same thing pretty much also in other fields like psychiatry, for instance. So it's we find a lot of biological reductionism in psychiatry, especially with regard to the use of drugs, for instance, and so on and so forth. And so in philosophy, it's the same thing still. So even though physicists have shown that the universe cannot be reduced to a physical machine nearly 100 years ago, most scientists and philosophers are either not aware of that or they don't want to they don't want to accept that.
But don't we have to be a little bit careful when we tread into the physicist territory and quantum physics in particular? Because there's a lot of pushback. There's a whole tsunami of pushback on the way that quantum physics has been kind of weaved into a lot of New Age thought. And I'm not saying at all that that's what you're doing, but I think there's a lot of fuzziness there. I think what we can say at the very least is that it's clearly an unsettled issue, and we have to take seriously the thought that quantum physics suggests that consciousness may be fundamental in the way that we generally think of matter as being fundamental. So I'm with you on all that.
Yeah, that's exactly my point, yes.
Yeah, I just don't want to get into that whole battle of, whether the observer effect really is and whether shut up and calculate and all that kind of stuff. I do think we can't shy away from it. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about your book is you don't shy away from anything. But we can't shy away from the fact that quantum physics may very well be best interpreted as being supportive of these ideas that you're talking about. But let me switch gears for a minute because one of the things I want to focus on, and I just mentioned it, I really appreciate that you're clear right from the start about talking in these kind of military terms. It's a brain war. It's a battle over science. So I want to spend a good deal of time talking about the book and the particular issues that you bring up, because I think, as you just said, one thing it does is how easily falsifiable some of the materialist positions are. But at the same time, I want to understand, I want you to tell us why we are in this war at the end of the day, why there is this battle, because I think a lot of folks tune into the fact that there's a war, that there is a battle, but they don't get it. I mean, so you've done these experiments that find that people can control their brain. So what? Why is there a war? Why is there a battle?
Well, because there's a commitment to a certain form of ideology in mainstream science.
Why? Why is there such a commitment?
Why? Because at the birth of modern science, the scientists decided to keep a certain distance from the church, the power of the church, understandably, and that has helped science to evolve, to make great progress. But at the same time, the founding fathers of modern science rejected, in a certain sense, the domain of subjectivity, the first-person perspective, the mental experiences. These things were considered to be only secondary qualities, and at the beginning they thought that these things were not that important. They decided to focus more on the physical, the physical world, matter, as they called that. And so this point of view became dominant, made progress during the following centuries, during the 17th and 18th century. And in the 19th century, this materialist and reductionist point of view became synonymous with science. And in the 20th century, it started to be challenged, first by quantum physics, but also in other domains. But we're now at the beginning of the 21st century, and this view is still considered to be the norm, the standard. It's the mainstream view because it's based on a number of beliefs, assumptions, like we said before. But for a long time, these assumptions seemed to explain very well the phenomena that were under investigations. However, now there's increasing evidence showing that a number of phenomena do not fit within this conventional materialist physicalist framework. They cannot be explained very well by this framework, and this is exactly what I'm discussing in my book, Brain Wars.
And I think you do a wonderful job of it. I want to get to that data. I just want to drill into this point a little bit further because I think, having covered this with a lot of different people, I think there's something a little bit deeper going on, and there's a comfort level that we all have with our consumerism, our materialism, our society that we've built, and it's a wonderful, wonderful society, especially when we look back historically at how much people have struggled just to barely survive, and we look at all the things that we have, and the cars and the airplanes and the iPhones and all that, and we are so enmeshed in this materialism that is both consumer materialism but also scientific materialism that I think it's very, very scary is the only word I can think of for folks to contemplate anything else. How could we really maintain our way of life that we've all become so comfortable with, that we're better than this other country, that we have a right to kind of starve that other country, deprive them of money, of oil, of food, whatever it is? Can we really maintain that if we take the long-term, larger picture view of what it would mean to be post-materialistic, both from a consumer standpoint, but also from a scientific standpoint? Don't the issues get really big, really quick when you think this thing through?
Yes, that's a very good point. I agree with your analysis. But there's something else also. Scientists are humans, and humans have their own belief systems, and they become attached in the long term with their belief systems. So a number of scientists have been, have believed very much in this materialist view for centuries, and so it's like it has become a central dogma in various fields, including neuroscience. So it's very dangerous. It's scary for a number of people if you're starting to challenge this mainstream dogma, the central dogma. It's a little bit like in any other domains of society, including religion. If you threaten the beliefs of specific, religious groups, then you might be in trouble. And that's exactly what we see also in science. But at a certain point, when the so-called anomalous data accumulate, there comes a point where the old paradigm cannot resist anymore. And I believe that now we are in a sort of transition period toward a new paradigm. So the next scientific revolution should be about mind and consciousness, in my view.
Very good. Well, I think you do a nice job in the book of kind of pointing out how dramatic the existing paradigm is frayed at the edges. And I like the way you start and tie together a lot of science that we all think we're very familiar with and we're comfortable with, and you show us how that really violates this scientific materialism that we've all become so accepting of. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about, for example, the placebo effect and also hypnosis, and how these two areas, and there are chapters in your book where you do a very nice job of bringing people through some of the research in a very accessible way. But tell us the placebo effect and hypnosis, how those violate a very strict understanding of reductionist materialism.
Yeah, well, for a number of materialist thinkers and scientists, the mind is totally powerless, doesn't have cannot exert any power on what's going on at the brain level and also in the body.
Can you break that down and explain why that would have to be true if you were a strict scientific materialist?
There are a number of materialist positions. So this is a position that is called Epiphenomenalism. So it means that these proponents recognize that mental processes do exist, but they are powerless. They don't have they cannot exert any influence. So that's one position. But you have other position like eliminative reductionism. So you're trying to eliminate all mental processes, like philosopher Daniel Dennett or the Churchlands, for instance. So they will say that consciousness and all the other mental processes are simply illusion, that the only thing that exists is electrochemical activity in the brain. So if this is true, then of course you cannot influence the activity of your brain by your beliefs, your expectations, you see. But that is exactly what the placebo demonstrates, that your beliefs and expectations about false fake treatment can significantly alter what's happening in the brain and also in the physiological systems connected to the brain. So, for instance, during the last decade, there has been several brain imaging studies about the placebo effect. And in some cases, for instance, there was a very interesting study done at University of British Columbia. They did a study to measure the impact of a placebo treatment on people suffering from a severe form of Parkinson's disease. In Parkinson's disease, there's a great level of destruction of the nerve cells, the neuron producing a chemical messenger that we call dopamine. Dopamine is the key chemical messenger in motor function, but it's also involved in many other activities. But in that specific case, the patients had a level of destruction of about 70 to 80%. So the level of destruction of the nerve cells producing dopamine was quite high. And of course, they were severely impaired from a clinical point of view. They had trouble to move. They were experiencing a lot of tremors. And so the neurologist doing the study presented them a fake treatment. It was only distilled water. But they told the patients that this was potentially a revolutionary treatment, a new treatment for Parkinson's disease. Following the injection, after a few minutes, they scanned them with technology that we call functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI. Pardon me, in that specific case, it was positron emission tomography. So they were interested in measuring the activity of dopamine in the brain. And so very rapidly, those patients who most believed in the fake treatment, which was distilled water, they started to produce dopamine and to release dopamine in their brains in amount comparable to that seen in young, healthy people. And in parallel, they started to get much better from a clinical point of view. So they had less tremors, they had more strength, and they were more optimistic, at least for a certain period of time. So this is a very nice illustration of the power of what we call mind. And by mind, I mean all the mental activity and mental events. And in that specific case, this effect is related simply to the beliefs and also the expectations that the patients had regarding the fake treatment. So it's a very nice illustration. Another interesting case is that of hypnosis. So hypnosis is based on the suggestions coming from an hypnotist, and the subject of the experiment accept the suggestions. Nowadays, the experts in this field of research consider that all forms of hypnosis are in reality self-hypnosis. That means that if the subject does not want to accept the suggestions from the hypnotist, it won't work. Again, during the last decade, there's been a number of brain imaging studies that have been done simply to measure whether really there's something happening at the brain level, because skeptics have been arguing for a long time that hypnosis is simply wishful thinking, that it's only based on social compliance from the subjects. You only want to please the hypnotist, but there's nothing else. So several research teams have attempted to research this question using brain imaging. And for instance, there was a very interesting study done at Harvard. The researchers were looking for the neural correlates of color vision. So neural correlates are physical processes in the brain, whether electrical or chemical, that are related to a specific mental activity. For instance, it can be perception of color. So in that case, they scanned the subjects, highly hypnotizable subjects, which means that these people had the capacity to enter quite easily into a trance state, deep enough. And so these subjects were able to imagine that they were looking or seeing different types of pattern colors in accordance with the suggestions of the researchers doing the study. And so it was very interesting because when they were presenting stimuli that were colored, but the researchers were telling the subjects that these stimuli were only green. The brain regions associated with the treatment, the processing of color in the brain, were not activated, even though the stimuli were colored. And the reverse effect was also measured, was also observed in the study. That is, when there was no color in the stimuli, there was still activation in the regions of the brain processing colors. So again, this is a very nice illustration that what's going on at the mind level can exert a great influence over what's happening in terms of brain activity.
Right, exactly. Like I said, you do a very nice job in the book, and I really encourage folks to get the book, whether you're a skeptic or a proponent or whatever, just a person interested in science. I think you'll enjoy the way that you bring forth this research, and you really document in a way that's easy accessible. You do have nice annotations, references to the research if people want to go look it up, but that's all there. So the question then remains, So why are we still having a war? You've just now linked up for us two things that we already were pretty accepting of. Hey, we all have heard of the placebo effect. We know that every study, every pharmaceutical study, every scientific study has to allow for a placebo effect. So they must recognize that there's some reality to it. And hypnosis has become so common that I think at least 1 out of 3 people have had some kind of hypnosis while at the dentist or someplace else. So given that we accept these modalities, these treatments, these understandings that violate strict materialism, why are we still in the battle? Why do we still have the war?
Well, because a number of scientists consider that you can interpret these phenomena using a strictly materialist framework.
How do they do that? What would be the...
Well, they will say that, for instance, you can reduce the beliefs and the expectations of a patient regarding the fake treatment to electrical and chemical activity in specific portions of the brain. So what they are saying essentially is that it's the brain acting upon the brain. You don't need mental, functions apart from the brain to explain this kind of phenomenon. That's what they say.
But doesn't that kind of result in some kind of recursive logic that at the end of the day gets into all sorts of other problems? I mean, what is the starting point in their explanation for such an activity? It gets into the whole neuroplasticity argument. Like if we show that neuroplasticity is real and that we can rewire our brain, and you've done some research on this as well and published some work on this, then doesn't it ultimately lead to the question of, well, then what was the beginning point, and wasn't there some observer, some consciousness that might have started this process?
Yeah, but for them, the neuroplasticity is simply the brain rewiring itself. Again, they don't need consciousness and other mental functions to explain that. That's what they say, but I don't think it's good explanation because the brain doesn't. The brain, to me, will respond to the expectations or the beliefs. And so if your beliefs are negative about fake treatment, bogus treatment, then you will experience something totally different. So in terms of the chemical messengers involved in the response, and so it's called the nocebo effect, it's exactly the reverse. So you need a person and a consciousness in order to produce a phenomenon like that. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense at all. Because the brain itself is quite neutral. So you can influence it in a way or in other. For instance, we've done another brain imaging studies, a positron emission tomography study. And in that case, we measured the activity of serotonin, which is very much involved in mood regulation, and also in emotions, a lot of emotions. And so we asked our subjects to simply remember and try to reenact the saddest episode of their lives. And we had another condition in which we asked the same thing, but this time they had to reenact the happiest moment of their lives. And in a matter of only a few minutes, we measured either increases in terms of serotonin production or increases in the positive, the happy state, and decreases in the negative state, the sad state, within a few minutes in regions of the brain related to emotions and mood regulation. You see, so this shows really that the content itself of the mental processes, their nature, will influence the direction that the brain activity will take. So that's why I'm claiming that it's not possible to interpret this kind of phenomenon without, recognizing the existence of mental processes.
It certainly seems a lot cleaner, but it seems rather obvious. What about this argument? And you'll hear this sometimes too. What about folks who say, okay, Just because you've shown that maybe this strict materialism as you've defined it doesn't work in this situation, maybe there's something else down the road that quote unquote science will discover that will explain this. We don't need to jump to this idea of there being a you inside your head, there being consciousness, there being dualism, no matter what word you want to throw at it. We don't need to jump off of the ship that we're on just yet, just because we have this finding. Well, how do you respond to that?
Well, this is called promissory materialism, and this concept was proposed by a famous philosopher of science, Karl Popper, in the 20th century. And but Popper analyzed the text of the materialists across a number of centuries, and the funny thing is that he realized that they were exactly saying the same thing 300 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 100 years ago. So they've always been arguing this, and so that's one aspect of the thing. But now we have evidence showing, in my view, that this materialist outlook is simply wrong. It's false. And I'm referring here to the studies about the so-called near-death phenomenon, near-death experience phenomenon, especially during cardiac arrests. Why is this important? Because during cardiac arrest, there's the blood flow to the brain will cease following a number of seconds, usually quite rapidly. And if you're measuring electrical activity in the brain using an EEG or electroencephalograph, the EEG will become flat within 10 to 20 seconds usually. So in that kind of state, according to mainstream neuroscience, higher mental functions are not possible. Yet during the last 10 years, I think there's been 4 or 5 different studies documenting over 100 cases of patients who reported conscious mental activity during a state of cardiac arrest. So this is quite interesting. And it's very hard for materialist scientists or philosophers to interpret this kind of phenomenon.
Yes, indeed. And you know we've covered that topic extensively on this show.
Yes.
But I do like the way that you summed it up there, and the way that you sum it up in your book is quite nice. So let's get on to the other elephant in the room here. Dr. Beauregard, one of the criticisms of your work, and it's sometimes made explicitly and sometimes just subtly implied, is that you're you're peddling some kind of Christian agenda. You really are trying to convert people to some kind of religion. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say that this is not true at all, because I'm not religious at all. I don't have any religious affiliation. So this is funny to hear. However, I consider myself to be a spiritual person, but I'm not pushing any religious agenda here. I don't have any ties with religious organizations.
Great. And I'm glad you had a chance to get that out there, because I think it's often subtly implied, and sometimes not even so subtly implied, that that's what's really going on here. And at the same
that's
time...
totally false.
Oh, good.
That's totally false.
Good. Because at the same time, though, I think we can be too reactionary the other way. Because we have to, I think, and I'd love to, I'm just throwing out my opinion, I really want to get your opinion, but I don't think we can play down the spiritual implications of some of this work. For example, the near-death experience science. We can look at it purely analytically from the science standpoint, and we can say, wow, this looks like there's something there. And we would be very inclined then to take the next step in terms of what they're telling us about spirituality and how it does link back, at least in some general way, to some of the wisdom traditions and religions that we've had over time. So what is your thought on that? Do we need to go there? Do we need to say, hey, there are some spiritual implications here that may have to be dealt with once we cross this chasm to a post-materialistic world? Or do we just kind of keep our nose to the grindstone and ignore all that and just pretend like it's all just about materialism?
No. I agree with you because if, of course, when we speak of so-called near-death experience during cardiac arrest, for instance, the people usually are reanimated within a few minutes, usually 2 to 3, 4 minutes, because they cannot stay in that kind of state for a long, long time without, severe cerebral damage. So, and when they report something about their transcendental component of their experience, whether it's being meeting with a beautiful being of light or meeting with deceased friends or relatives and so on and so forth, that from a scientific point of view, we cannot validate it or not. We can only attempt to validate what they report from a perceptual point of view. So the out-of-body component of this experience, that can be corroborated by external source. And it's been done in a few cases by members of the medical staff. But of course, like you said, what they are reporting from a subjective point of view seems to, validate some spiritual traditions, seems to provide certain evidence that there might be spiritual realms out there. And I'm open-minded to this kind of suggestion. And like I said, I'm a spiritual person, and this would not surprise me at all if there are a multitude of spiritual realms that we don't know yet. And I don't think it's not scientific to have that kind of point of view.
It's human, isn't it? I mean, that's the part I think we have to acknowledge, that these are fundamental human questions, that the whole endeavor of science, that's why it came about, was to understand who we are, what place we have in the universe, what happens to us when we die. These are the ultimate questions. So I think that couldn't be more fairly put, that these are real concerns that we all have. We have to acknowledge that.
Yes, and also spiritual experiences have been reported across all traditions, cultures, and since the beginning of time, So they really do exist from a subjective point of view. Now, we don't have of course, we don't have a scientific explanation for these experiences yet, but what I'm saying is that we need to remain open-minded regarding this aspect.
Very good. Near the end of your book, Brain Wars, you talk about a shift in consciousness. And I'd like you to talk about that and whether you really think, number one, that is likely, that can come about. We are so enmeshed. We are so married to this materialism. Can we really get beyond it? And question two related to that is, how might that come about? Is it going to be an evolutionary change, or does it require a radical, revolutionary shift?
Well, there's I can say that at least in my own field, there's an increasing number of scientists, and also in other disciplines, challenging the old materialist worldview. So it's done not only by scientists, but also by philosophers themselves. So in the last few years, we've seen books came out, about the waning of materialism and so on and so forth. And so now several different scientists are starting to question this. So we're in a transition period, like I said before. And in certain circles, scientists are creating sorts of union. We're getting together. We're trying to getting organized. For instance, there's a special issue of a journal, a mainstream journal in neuroscience called Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. And next year, there will be a special issue about the possibility of non-local mind. And this is a sign of time, because only 10 years ago or 15, 20 years ago, this would have not been possible at all. So now it's becoming possible to discuss these important issues publicly and even to challenge the mainstream view openly, overtly. So this was not possible at all before. So there's a progress regarding this evolution in our field, and so I think that there eventually will be a big revolution in science, and this will be about mind and consciousness, and the same kind of revolution that they've had about 100 years ago in physics, from classical physics to quantum physics, will have probably the same, in our own field. And at the same time, in parallel, of course, like you said at the beginning of the interview, if you talk to lay people, to most people, they do not believe that they are strictly biological robots, that they don't have any influence over their brain activity or what's happening in the body, and so on and so forth. And so it won't be difficult if there's the start of really a transition in science, within science. It will go quickly because the rest of the world, is very sympathetic regarding a non-materialist view of consciousness and of human life and of the universe.
Right. Very good point. So, Dr. Beauregard, tell us a little bit about the research that you're currently engaged in, and also, if you want to tell us anything else we can find out about the book, that'd be great too. So, what are you working on nowadays?
Well, I'm doing brain imaging experiments regarding some types of altered states of consciousness, and especially spiritual consciousness. So that's one thing. I'm also investigating the capacity of the human mind to influence or to control the activity of regions involved in emotional responses. So it's called emotion regulation. So that's one aspect. But from a theoretical point of view, I'm also in the process of developing a new theory about the role and the impact of mind and consciousness in nature.
Great. You want to tip your hand a little bit and tell us what you're thinking in general terms?
Well, I'm planning to present this theory in this special issue that will be published next year in the Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. And the basic ideas about that, it's mind, consciousness are irreducible. They cannot be reduced to matter. They are fundamental in the universe as much as the fundamental forces of physics. And they are as important as what we call space, time, and also the physical world. And so what I'm planning to do is simply to demonstrate that from an empirical point of view. So I'm presenting a series of empirical evidence showing that mental processes and events exert a great influence within the body, the brain and body, but also outside of the physical body, beyond the confines of the brain and the body. So, in essence, that's the gist of it.
Wow, well, that's exciting. That's a great teaser for the upcoming article, and we'll certainly look for that.
You know what? The good news is that when I'm presenting these things, to for instance, can be Department of Psychiatry or even to some neuroscientists, and these days now they are more willing to listen, and to reflect about these things. And like I said before, 10 years ago, this would not have been possible at all. So it's a sign that things are starting to change, really.
Great. That's very interesting to hear from someone who's on the front line of this work like you are. I really value that opinion, and I think folks will take heart in that. So the book, again, is Brain Wars, the scientific battle over the existence of the mind and the proof that will change the way we live our lives. Dr. Mario Beauregard, thank you again so much for joining me today on Skeptico.
Thanks very much, Alex.
Thanks again to Dr. Mario Beauregard for joining me today on Skeptico. A couple of questions I'd tee up from this interview. The first would have to do with the placebo effect. I haven't really talked a lot about the placebo effect on this show, but I think Dr. Beauregard does a nice job of showing how it, too, adds to the mounting evidence against scientific materialism. So I'd be interested to hear how you pull that apart and how you process some of the research that he's pointing to in that area. And the second question would be returning to a topic we talk about frequently, and that is the paradigm shift. So Dr. Beauregard is suggesting that, hey, things really are moving in the right direction, and that this science, which seems pretty self-evident to most of us, is gaining traction. I'd like to think that's true, but I think embedded in that belief is a misunderstanding of just how powerful the forces that would resist that really are, and the fact that they haven't really been challenged to a great degree right now makes it hard to estimate just how hard their pushback might be. Anyways, I'm tipping my hand as to my take on that, but I think it'd be interesting to dredge that up and debate that one more time. And the place to do that, of course, is either in the forum or on the comment section of the website. The website address, again, is skeptiko.com. So there you'll find a link to the forum, or you can add your comment right there on the website. And you'll also find links to all of our almost 200 previous shows. So be sure to check that out and connect with us. Let us know your thoughts on the show, and in particular on these topics that Dr. Beauregard has brought to us. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I have a number of interesting shows coming up. Stay with me for all of that. Until next time, take care. Bye for now.